Okay, so we have set sail with the Pilgrims. You'll notice that they set sail in September, right? Living on the east coast of America, we know what happens this time of year, right? The end of summer. This is when there's lots of tropical storms and hurricanes. But living in England, you don't know this. So the Pilgrims were blown off course by a bad storm. Could have been a tropical storm or a hurricane. We don't know. But what's interesting, remember their charter was for Virginia, but they got blown all the way into Massachusetts, which is a big detour. Now, they landed at Cape Cod. And here's one of the first things we'll uncover is that the different lies we've been told when we were in elementary school. One of those lies is that the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. Lie. The Pilgrims landed at Cape Cod. They settled their colony at Plymouth. Now, what's significant about the Mayflower Compact, right? So here we have a group of people, and they get together, and they decide that they're going to govern themselves, self-governance. So they have to have a document for that, and the name of this document is the Mayflower Compact. So you notice here in the visual is that these Pilgrims, they're religious people, right? You'll notice to the left that people are in prayer as Bradford is lifting his hand up to the heavens, asking for God's blessing as they enter into this compact. Compact is like a contract, right? So the Mayflower Compact provided social, economic, and religious freedom, right? Now, religious freedom, that's probably the one that people today are most familiar with, is that we're able to worship however we want. We don't necessarily have to worship like the king and queen do. Now, social and economic freedom, this was something that was very different than in England at this time. In England at this time, if you were born poor, you were going to live your whole life poor. If your father was a blacksmith in England at this time, you were going to be a blacksmith because that's what your father did. The idea of social mobility and choosing your own profession during this time, not just in England, but throughout the European continent, is really, people hadn't advanced that far, but when we get to the Pilgrims in America, they're like, hey, one of the reasons we're here is to do things differently. Not just worship different, but have social mobility. Get to determine our own, choice regarding career and trade or profession. But what's interesting is that the Pilgrims decided to remain loyal to England. So they're still subject to the crown. So what do we get from the Pilgrims? Things like the first Thanksgiving. Now, 9 years later, right? Okay, let's jump to the Puritans. Just like with the Pilgrims, the Puritans were fleeing an English king. This time it was King Charles I. Remember that the Puritans wanted to reform the church. Just as like with the Pilgrims, the Puritans get financial backing from merchants, and without those merchants putting down their money and taking a gamble and buying and outfitting the ships and all the provisions, none of this would have happened. Then they set sail to the New World in 1630. Now here, this is John Winthrop. John Winthrop was the leader of the Puritans. He was the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Before, with the Pilgrims and William Bradford, we had the Mayflower Compact. Now with the Puritans and John Winthrop, we have the Arbella covenant. And that's the name of their ship that they came over on. Now, here's something different between the Pilgrims and the Puritans. The Puritans established a religious and theocratic settlement. So what does that mean? It means there's no religious freedom. So in other words, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, there's only one church to go to. There's different, as the colony grows and spreads, there'll be different church buildings, but all those churches are going to be the Puritan church. And if you want to go to a different church, you're going to pack up and leave, because this is a theocratic settlement. So what does theocratic settlement mean? John Winthrop, right? He was a pastor, and he was also the civil governor. Wow. So here's something crazy, y'all. The Puritans, right, didn't like what was going on in England because there was no separation of church and state. In other words, the king was not only the leader of the country, but the leader of the church, right? They don't like that, so when they come to America, and what do? They do the same thing. Yeah, I know, this is bonkers. So in other words, they established the same thing, a theocratic settlement, no religious freedom, just like it was back in England during this time. Oh, and this is one of the, we're going to see this strange behavior in Americans again and again throughout the course. Another difference between the Puritans and the Pilgrims is that the Puritans cut ties to Great Britain. They were not going to remain loyal to the crown. And eventually, as we start to move through the course, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was merged with the Plymouth Plantation Colony because they just got so big that they just kind of grew together. So what do we get in America here today in the 21st century? Part of our Puritan legacy, right? In business, doing an honest day's labor has dignity, right? And also from the Puritans, we look upon people who are out of work or who are in poverty, and we kind of scowl at them a little bit, look at them out of the corner of our eyes, that they're shiftless and lazy, and that's why they're in poverty or experiencing hard times. We get some of that from the Puritans. And government, the idea of a small, limited government, and the idea that the conscience of the individual is the ultimate judge of right and wrong. And also from the Puritans, the high value upon morality and ethics, especially in public life. And sadly, this last point from our Puritan legacy has about been washed out as of late with our politicians who are disappointing top to bottom with morality and ethics. I think our Puritan forefathers would probably put them into the stockade for the way that our politicians behave. Also, what do we get from the Puritans, part of our Puritan legacy? The Salem witch trials, yes. So this is the time that we're in. And if we look at the visual here, right, the judge on the left, right, he's also clergyman. Everyone who's wearing what we think would be lawyers' robes, right, the black with the white collar, these are all clergymen. So this is what we mean by no separation of church and state, theocracy. So we'll continue with the period overview in the next lecture.